And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. I have the great pleasure to introduce Raffi Jamgotchian, who is the CTO and president for Triada Networks. Thanks, Raffi, for joining. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me, David.
So I always like to invite people that are knowledgeable in the cybersecurity space, but also entrepreneurs that decided to jump into the deep end and create your own business. So why don't we start with kind of your background and what you've done so far? You have a fascinating background with some very unique experiences, and why don't we start there?
Sure. I'm a computer engineer by trade. I studied computer engineering initially to be a control systems engineer. I would design circuits and software that controlled motors and various other things, and that put me in a job in the audiovisual industry for one of the bigger control systems manufacturers. I met some people on a job while doing a video conferencing project in IT management for a financial firm, and that was I didn't really understand. I didn't know IT, I didn't know networking, but I've been around computers since I was a young boy. My dad was a mainframe programmer, so I took the opportunity to work in finance in the IT industry and kind of moved up from there. Worked there for over a dozen years until one of the managers tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, look, I'm starting my own investment company. Can you come help me out?" And that's how we started our venture into building a new small business with him. And then 18 months later, I spun out and started Triada Networks to help other companies just like him, smaller investment firms, deal with their cybersecurity and IT systems. And that's my origin story.
Yeah, that's very cool. And wow, mainframe programmer. That's super cool. I mean, that stuff. These folks were, hardcore. I think some of these mainframes were like
Still doing it. He's still doing it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, the thing is with these, there's so few people that actually know today. It's almost like security by obscurity.
Yeah.
Like how many people are, knowledgeable in the mainframe, and what is it like COBOL? What's the
Yeah,
programming language?
COBOL and JCL. It was the job control language that he used, and he's still doing it today for major financial firms. So
Yeah, it's so cool.
yeah,
And it's amazing that they still use the same mainframes that they've
they
used
don't
so
break.
many years. They don't break. And I think also it's the backbone for a lot of these, hardcore transactions. And then, it's very hard to put a stop, to that, and then kind of do a refresh and forklift these mainframes. It's almost
Yeah,
impossible.
you can change the limbs and the arms around the body, but the heart and the lungs and the circulatory system, that's what a lot of these large firms are still running on. And even the newer applications are just built a crust around what that old center core is, and they continue to develop it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Do you ever talk security? With your dad about the like the mainframes and how those things work? I'm assuming that some of them are not even connected to the outside world, or do
No,
they?
and most of the time they're not, and most of the time even less so. Even the direct access is no longer there. Where in the past, where you'd actually get terminal access, right now terminal access really limited to very specific operators, and nearly everything now is developed using web services and what have you. So there's a lot more. There's modernization, but the core systems are still running on that back end. And even some of the reports are still COBOL reports that just print out pages and pages of data.
Where they kind of the
No
black
more
screen
punch
back.
cards, though. So the punch cards are gone.
Those punch cards were cool, and just to be able to program with a punch card, to think about it, how when you make a mistake and you have to run it again,
Yeah,
you have to create the whole thing.
exactly.
Unbelievable. And now people complain about the fact that they have to recompile, and it takes a little time for that. Um, so tell me, investment firms, they have unique requirements from a cybersecurity
Sure.
perspective. Talk to me about that a bit. Like, what are kind of the main concerns? A lot of them run like these black box operations, and they're extremely paranoid. Is that a true statement?
Yes and no. I think it really depends on
Mhm.
the type of investment company they are. I came out on a buy side firm We didn't have an information security program. It was very new. I was I wouldn't say that I was the person, but we were one of the core people that started building out the information security program at that firm. Initial vulnerability management databases, building new firewalls, connecting the first connections to the internet. And that helped us kind of learn the process of what was going on. And then as we matured as a company and as we matured as a group, we also matured our processes. If you take a look at what's available today from an information point of view, so much more now that you can kind of run with. But at the time, there really wasn't a lot. And so because we knew that our companies, the company that we worked with, had a fiduciary responsibility to their investors, we took a very cautious approach about how we connected with various systems. And then, after 9/11, we started seeing the know your customer things coming out. Same thing with some of the regulations related to Gramm-Leach-Bliley. And there was a lot more controls that had to be defined, and we were building them as we went. And now today we have these frameworks, at least, that we can kind of hang our hat on and say, okay, this is what we're following. But at the time, we were building them as we went, and so that was kind of the early stages of that. And so in the financial services, you think about what are the assets that you're protecting, and you want to make sure that you invest properly to protect those assets. So if you have assets that are worth a lot of money, it's worth spending the money to protect those assets. Mm-hmm. And I think many times companies will make that mismatch of a determination of whether they're spending too much to protect against something of low risk or low value, or vice versa, not spend enough to protect something of high risk or high value.
So when you mention frameworks, are you referring specifically to like NIST or other types of security frameworks?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, at the time there really was. I mean, there were some early ones. There was early ISO had some frameworks. We followed those for really around business continuity more than anything else. But today we have all these different frameworks. In fact, now probably way too many frameworks. And that makes it a little bit harder to say, hey, this is the one I'm going to hang my hat on for, but the important thing is find one that works for your company, adopt it, and then make it your own. Ultimately, you have to adopt it to what your needs are, what your regulatory needs are. So when we do it, when we work with a firm based on their size, we'll take a blending of frameworks and their regulations. FINRA is not super prescriptive, but there's some things that are prescriptive. FFIEC is a little bit more prescriptive. So there's these other parts that we connect in and say, okay, this is the framework that we're going to manage towards. These are then you build your policies on top of the framework. Then you build your procedures on top of those policies, and so forth and so on.
So interesting. So you mentioned a blend. Aren't these frameworks almost a bit of a blend anyway? Like there's a bit of an overlap to a lot of them.
Most of them are overlapped. I mean, if you look at, there's a number of ways that you can look at that structure. There's a organization, nonprofit organization or a free organization called Security Controls Framework. It's been put together by a number of other for-profit firms, but basically they have a large matrix of, here are hundreds of controls on one side of the spreadsheet, and across the top all the different regulations, and basically check boxes of where those match. So you can easily take, hey, these are my regulations that I need to follow, and these are all the controls for those regulations and that framework, and put together a matrix of what each control is and what things it checks off. This way, if today, you're all of a sudden you're now in Europe, and you need to expand into Europe, and you have to add the GDPR column, you can see which things you're already doing that matches up with those with that regulation. And thus, shorten your time to deployment without having to redo everything.
Mhm. Interesting. Let's talk a bit about regulation. So these investment firms, despite the fact that they're not necessarily large, they still have to comply with certain regulations, right? As a financial,
Yeah.
um, and there's quite a overhead, like a burden to comply, like in terms of cost, in terms of the the controls they have to put in place. What is the role specifically for cybersecurity to comply with these controls and new regulations, and how these specifically investment firms that are not, they don't have the, kind of the capacity or the teams associated with running and being compliant, deal with these specific regulations?
Yeah, no, that's a excellent point. I mean, that's why Triada Networks really exists is really for that purpose.
I teed you up on this one.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I wasn't very good at t-ball, but I can hit a ball off a stick. Yeah, definitely. So that's really kind of what happens in these larger firms where the regulations were originally developed for these bigger firms, and now I would say more in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we're seeing some more guidance from some of the regulators. Like FINRA has put together the small firm cybersecurity checklist. So the cybersecurity piece of it is a subset of the overall compliance requirements. So cybersecurity, if you think of it as a Venn diagram, there's the compliance requirements as a financial firm. There are all the cybersecurity things that any business should do, and there's an overlap between the two of them. So the way we look at it is we're really looking at that whole overlap. We're looking at not only the compliance and cybersecurity angle that work together, but also the things outside of compliance that are still, in our opinion, I hate to use the term, but lack of a better one, best practices, what we think a firm should do to protect even though it may not necessarily be spelled out in a regulation, which is why that's why we lean on these frameworks to give us some backbone around defining what those things are that a company will do. This way, when a regulator comes, or many times an investor will come and sit across the table from one of our clients and say, look, we're doing due diligence on you. We want to make sure you're doing everything you possibly can to protect our money. There were large pension, whatever it is. And our job is to show them that the company, our client, is doing everything they can to make sure that their information and their money is safe. And that sometimes goes beyond what just the compliance regulation tells you to do.
It's super interesting because on the risk perspective, there's always this dichotomy between the amount of money that you have to spend, the budget, and the assets that you're looking to protect, and then where to allocate the funds in terms to get the best bang for the buck in terms of protection, right? So to reduce the risk, right?
Right.
If you had unlimited funds, then you can just create unlimited protection, but that's not the case. Does that also happen from a compliance perspective and regulatory environment, where you look at the kind of the regulation and say, okay, these I can kind of glance over because it's going to cost me too much to do, but I'm going to focus on these top two because potentially that's where the regulators are going to come over and ask me. Is that also the case?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, you're going to have to answer to the regulator in one form or another, whether it's in an audit or just in terms of standard due diligence. So it makes sense for you to do something towards that regulatory requirement. Things that are prescriptive, you have to do. When the regulation says that you need to archive electronic communications and store it in an immutable form for 7 years, that's fairly specific and fairly prescriptive. So you make sure you're doing that. But if they're saying something a little bit more general in terms of no shared accounts, and these are things that are cheap or free in the sense of from a fiscal cost perspective, but operationally could be a little bit more expensive for a company. So what we recommend is let's focus on those things and then look at what the roadmap is to get a company from where they are to the ultimate goal. Now, the compliance goalpost is always moving, and so is the cybersecurity post. So it's something that's constantly evaluated. So we evaluate it every quarter or so and say, look, are there new regulations or there new language around or new um, uh, findings around a regulation that that we need to interpret a little bit differently, similarly to the frameworks and similar to the nature of cybersecurity risk. Like when FINRA put together their small business cybersecurity checklist for compliance and cybersecurity purposes, they weren't talking about ransomware. Looking at the way ransomware has torn through all industries, not just financial. You look at how that affects the risk associated with the company. Is there any regulation around that? Is there any compliance regulation specifically talking about that risk level? No, but you still need to do the right thing in order to protect your company and your clients' assets from that kind of risk level.
It's fascinating. You mentioned specifically that it's a moving target, and because it's when people talk about compliance, is they don't necessarily think about it as a kind of a moving target. It almost seems like, okay, they release a regulatory requirements and with GDPR or other frameworks, and then you have to comply. But what you're describing is that it's very dynamic and it happens on a regular basis. So how do you keep up? And I'm assuming, again, this is part of where Triada Networks come in, because you are dealing with multiple clients, have the advantage over someone else, because it seems like you're more in tune in terms of what's happening and what's changing, because that's what you do for a living.
Yeah. So if you worked for when I was working in corporate IT, we but we worked with the internal chief compliance officer and their team. And we would work directly with trying to figure out, okay, these are the compliance regulations that we need to deal with. This is our answer to that. And kind of there was a back and forth with that. In this environment, we not only doing that, but now we're multiply that across all our client bases. So it's very possible, and in fact, frequent, where one of our client firms will bring a new regulation or new issue that is hitting their business well before it hits somebody else's. So we get the benefit of our network of clients to come to us and say, hey, look, this is something that that the SEC is looking for in our case. What do we need to do? So we work to help solve that issue. And now that becomes part of our process across all our clients, because we know that's going to now affect potentially one or more of our other clients downstream. So it's one of the benefits of being connected with multiple companies rather than just a singular company. We get that view.
Yeah,
Similarly,
network effect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the same thing with compliance officers. There are compliance officers that also work with small firms across multiple financial vehicles and multiple industries. So it may very well is same situation where they're getting the bits and pieces from lots of different angles. And so we see that goes on. We also network with other information technology and cybersecurity professionals that work with other industries besides financial, and that also informs our knowledge and what have you. So unlike some of the other industries that have been more ravaged by certain kinds of risk points versus finance, seeing that has helped us now work to protect our clients from that same kind of risk level.
And I'm assuming you deal mainly with financials, investment firms that are in the kind of the tri-state area, just due to your geographical location. But they have to comply to, depending again where they do business, they have to comply with other regulations that are can be worldwide, right? So how do you then deal with that? Again, there's I think every state has its own regulatory, especially for financials, regulatory environment. Like, for example, even breach notification, right?
Yes.
If something happens, and you have 48 states where each one has different. So how do you consult with your clients on multi-jurisdiction type of compliance, and is that a concern to them when they're doing business, or just the cost of doing business?
No, I mean it is the cost of doing business. We also follow what, I would say the big states that are very forward thinking when it comes to this sort of thing, whether that's New York, California, Illinois, Texas. These are the states that many have different mentalities when it comes to whether it's specifically notification laws or financial services. New York has been on the forefront, obviously, because of the amount of financial services company within its realm on when dealing with certain requirements for financial firms that are regulated by their financial division, or it's something related to just breach notification. So when California came out with their breach notification laws and now their privacy laws that mirror similar to GDPR, we're going to see that same thing happen in multiple states going forward. So that was my kind of setup to this, where we're looking at from a company perspective that needs to work with all of these entities. It's we're not a law firm. We don't play one on TV. We work with the company's legal staff to figure out what is specific to them. We can inform them that the laws require a specific breach notification. Typically, what we try to do is say, to make it simple for the company, look at the most restrictive one that you have to deal with, make that your policy, and make sure you stick to that policy and use that for all the states. Now, if there's a conflict between two different regulations, in other words, let's say one says 72 hours and one says 48 hours, you pick the 48 hours. But if they're completely different types of things, then that's something that we need to have a conversation to figure out what the right policy for the company is, or do we have to have differing policies depending on where the client and then the investment is.
Super interesting. It's it's so intricate, right? It seems like every industry specific has its own idiosyncrasies in terms of how to work with. So one is that comes to mind, that springs to mind when we were talking about this specifically, is that some of these investment firms have a certain DNA to them, right? In terms of the people that are employed, maybe like from a character's perspective, they might be like wealth individuals and so on. And what's coming is that, do you sometimes have to have these difficult conversations in terms of like, putting your foot down, because at the end of the day, you're responsible for some of these security controls and they're going to come to you if something happens? Do you ever have to like have this, difficult conversation and be strict or kind of push back on things that they want to do and potentially not be in line with what your advice would be?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the finance world, there are a lot of A-type personalities for sure. When I worked in corporate, there was definitely a number of trading desk phones that were broken over the years, and you just basically said, "All right," you turned around and you took care of it. That, I think, that changed a little bit over time, especially after in the 2000s. I think that mentality kind of shifted away. But certainly,
what's the name, Raffi? What's the name of that movie? The Wolf of Wall Street.
Wolf of Wall Street, yeah. So there's definitely some truth to that. I've experienced it a few occasions. I've seen some yelling matches. Certainly, we've been on the other end of some of that. But on a security team, we take a look at, we try to present something not being the people of no, but trying to say, look, we're gonna be your seatbelt and your airbags. We're not going to tell you not to drive, but we're going to make sure that if you're drunk, we're taking your keys away. I mean, that's definitely something that will happen.
So but you have, and I will do a breathalyzer before every time before you take a trip.
Yeah, exactly. So we try to do our best to show them that, look, we're in this with them. We're doing what we can to make sure that they're not going off the rails on something that's going to end up biting themselves in the future. So that's our position on that. Ultimately, it's their business, and they have to run with it, and they get to call the shots. However, we're still going to be, we're still going to give them the proper advice that is, and not mince words. If a company is doing something that is, look, you're doing this. This is, a good example is we are working with an investment firm that is international, and as a result of that, the communication channels can be very, very different in an international world beyond just, say, email or whatever. They'll use other, say, messaging platforms that don't necessarily fall within the purview of the technology department. But the regulations say that all electronic communications needs to be archived in an immutable place. And so if they're doing business on these systems, can I prevent them from doing it? No. But all I can do is say, look, I can tell them, you cannot do business on this. If you are doing business on this, we need to figure out a way to make sure that you're collecting and archiving this message, so that in the future, if the regulators come and say, why did this trade occur? Give us all the information around this conversation. And it's found that you had a conversation on a unregulated or unmonitored channel. That's a problem. And they're going to drop the hammer in a big way. And so our job is to make sure that we've given them the at least the education, at the very least, some options on what they should be doing or not doing.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it's they're between the rock and a hard place, because their clients are
Exactly.
requiring them to use communication forms that are not necessarily available to do all of that and be secured.
Certainly.
So that's a bit of a problem right there.
Nothing stops me from texting my Merrill Lynch rep to say, this is the trade I want to make, but
Right.
my Merrill Lynch rep doesn't have to listen to that text message at all.
Right. Yes, but then they can say, okay, like, we don't want to upset you as a customer.
Right. So you find it. Then, so what you do is you return the conversation in a form that is mutually workable.
Right.
And is that, I'm talking in a very idealistic terms, of course, but that's ultimately, as a practitioner here, we can only do so much. You can't. It's like, so it's like herding cats or raising kids. You can help them, teach them how to function as human beings along the way. Ultimately, they have to make decisions and do things on their own.
Yeah, it's like what the saying, you can bring a horse to the water, but you can't make them drink.
Yes.
So specifically, they're also unique in the sense these investment firms that are, even though they don't have a large footprint, they are potentially a high risk target, right? Because these individuals that are responsible for money transactions and so on can be, spearphished, for example, for very targeted attacks and so on. So, how much of that is going on, and how do you deal with that? Do you, I'm assuming you debrief some of your clients and specifics and trying to have them more aware, because again, they're typically the weakest link is not the technology, but it's the people, clicking on the kind of the wrong email. And some of these emails are almost impossible to review, or even a text message can be malicious and so on. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, the human firewall has become kind of a cliche in some ways, but there's a large amount of truth to it. We still look at making sure that we have as much protections in place as possible to assist from a technology point of view for the company or the person to make that individual to make the right decision. That includes information around the messaging, but also information before the messaging. So what do I mean by that? Part of that is security awareness training, certainly. We require most of their insurance, cyber insurance providers now require that they go through that. So at the very least, they have some baseline information about risks and attacks that take place. The other piece is that we let them know about active attacks that are taking place. It's something maybe we've seen at one customer. We let all our other clients know that, by the way, we're seeing this kind of attack. You may also be seeing it as well. Be on the lookout for it. And then the third part is that, again, adding in the technical piece, we want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to inform the person in real time that there is something, and that there's nothing wrong with asking a question. Is this legitimate? Mm-hmm. To the best of your knowledge, is this email that I just received legitimate? There are other parts of it that they're very difficult to technically see if it is a legitimate or not. Wire transfers, for example. Somebody getting in the middle of a wire transfer or providing information related to a wire transfer, and it may not even us or our client that's compromised. It could be the other firm that they're communicating with, which is compromised, now giving them information about doing a wire transfer. And they're like, okay, this is my contact. This is who I always talk to. I'm going to make the change that they're requesting. Having the company have the right procedures and processes in place such that, as simple as there needs to be a second form of communication before any such transaction takes place, then that's something that is that we help our clients formulate so that they don't have to have this problem occur. Executive impersonation is a massive thing that goes on in particularly in the financial world, whether it's CEO impersonation to downstream employees saying, hey, I need this done, go do it, versus also, the other direction where we're seeing companies getting the CEO being impersonated against other firms. So there's that whether it's a compromise or it's just a spoof, you're not sure. Something looks fishy. Most people get a spider sense tingling a little bit. And yes, sometimes the controls don't help. You need a human to actually review it. And, there's nothing wrong with asking your security team or your technical team, hey, can you take a look at this to see if it's legit? This is a person that normally talks to me. I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing here.
Raffi, that's such a solid advice. Always ask one more question. You could have been like so much more secure if people did that. Just one more question can solve so many really bad incidents. And the adversaries also use social engineering, so they combined and tell this to the executive to not post publicly where they're going, or the fact they're going on vacation, because that's when things are really bad. Because the adversaries know that you're going on vacation. That's when they hit your admin. Yeah. That's when you hit your colleagues because and they know you're not. You're a different time zone. You're panicking with your family. The kids are screaming in the background. That's when they hit you with the kind of the money transfer wire request approval.
Yeah, and then those really more sophisticated attacks where the adversary has done that kind of homework where they know that you're away and they're doing it at that time, especially if you're time zones are off and you're not awake when this is happening, that kind of thing, versus the ones that just spray and that, well, my boss is down the hall. Why is he emailing me about buying gift cards and all of a sudden? So there's that, and you're dealing with a sophisticated attacker. They know when they're dealing with a financial firm that there's potentially more to gain, so they're going to spend more time to go after your information. And we do leak a lot of that in our social media. This has been an old recommendation that to our family and friends and clients for a long time. Look, post your vacation pictures, no problem, but do it after you come home. There's no reason why.
Solid advice.
No one needs to see that you're on the beach today.
Yeah.
So what if you were there last week?
Or the Hamptons or whatever else you're
Exactly.
traveling to.
Exactly.
So tell me, and we're kind of running out of time, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about maybe some war stories, like when you got the frantic call and you put in your Superman socks and like
How did you
I don't
know?
know, virtually went out to because I know you have a pair,
I do.
and then you you walk over to the office and you help them out. Do you have something we can take away and maybe some success stories?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you kind of two little stories. One, the one that actually got me really more intensely interested in cybersecurity, and that was the first one was in the early 2000s. There was a worm that broke out called Code Red. It was named after the Mountain Dew drink, and because programmers like to drink Mountain Dew, so they called it Code Red. Um, I was really fascinated with this. So few years into my IT career, maybe 5-6 years, all of a sudden I'm working for this investment firm and we see this worm breakout that's going around, hitting every machine in the office. And I was superly fascinated by this. And this was the reason why I got more intensely. We had already started building firewalls and kind of doing the basic stuff, but this really got me interested in what this whole world was all about. And we dove in and tried to figure out, what everything was. So that's the kind of one thing, is like you have to have some curiosity around these things, and these things need to excite you and fascinate you. And I'm a super student of all the things that go on, whether it's in finance or not. And we even watch the stuff that goes on in kind of the geopolitical world, where we see these kind of the nation state actors. So some of those do attack financial firms. Some of them do not. We've seen the Iranian hackers that have broken into Chase some years ago. We see those kind of things, but that part of it is really super, super interesting. But I'll tell you a little story about two customers that not too long ago, and this is ransomware related, so we want to kind of touch on that. Is that one was a client, one was not a client yet. Both of them received a fake invoice from a shipping firm in their finance department. Two departments, by the way, that get lots of emails from lots of unknown and not typical places. One is finance or accounting. The second is HR. HR gets resumes from everybody. So those are the two departments that you need to watch out the most with. So in this case, it happened to be accounting. Both the head accountant or the person that was doing that opened up the attachment. There was a PDF, and infected their machine. So in the case of one that wasn't a client yet, destroyed all of their invoices on their network that was available. So that was one. The other was similar with this one was an active client, where we realized through an employee saying, hey, I can't open this file, which was within 10-15 minutes of them opening the attachment, where we had them recovered. So we had stopped the spread. We had to recover the data that had been lost, and they were back up and running within about, I'm going to say 20 minutes to 30 minutes or so. Things were cleaned up and running. Whereas the other firm apparently did not have working backup systems for 2 years. The company that they had working with, the firm that they entrusted to do their backups, wasn't checking that the backups were working. And as a result, they lost 2 years of data. So these are the kind of horror stories you hear. And this is something that is, very basic. There are much worse things that are happening today. Yeah. We're seeing supply chain attacks that are attacking our software vendors, that are taking out vast swaths of companies all at once with massive ransoms. There's and those are the kinds of things that you keep you up at night, whether you're an IT or security professional. Mm-hmm. We have to keep on listening to this, looking at what the threat intelligence is, seeing what other folks are seeing, and collaborating. It's one of the things that's great about the IT services and cybersecurity services companies, is that they collaborate with each other. It doesn't matter if they're your client or somebody else's client. They're going to help you not only try to figure out what happened, but help you even in the ages of recovery. We had a colleague that was affected by a recent supply chain attack that took out all of his clients, and
Wow.
the community rallied around him to help him recover his customers back to normalcy. It took some time, but it was something that small firm by himself might be difficult to do without the help of the community, and that's what's great about being in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find the cybersecurity community by itself is very open and very collaborative. People are willing to help each other. And it's a small, it's just, 6 degrees of separation does not exist in cybersecurity. It seems like
No.
it's more like 2 or 3, especially in the
Yeah.
tri-state area.
Yep.
Raffi, it's been a really great conversation, very enlightening. What's the best way for people to reach out to you for advice, for mentorship, insight, being a client, whatever else?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. Look up Raffi Jamgotchian if you can figure out how to spell my name. That's one way to find me. Triada Net is our website, and which is also our handle on most social media sites as well, other than LinkedIn. So those are probably the best ways to reach out to us if you like some assistance, some advice, some help, whatever. Just a conversation. Our phone numbers on our website. Give us a call. Set up some time. Be happy to talk to anybody.
And like anything, you want to have that trusted advisor, just like you have the phone number for a plumber ahead of time.
Yes.
You don't wait until something happens.
We do the same thing. Even, for our own sake, we have a list of people that we want. It's incident response people in our local FBI branch. We're a member of the Secret Service Cyber Fraud Task Force. So our Secret Service agents, these are the people you want to have in your Rolodex before something happens, as you said.
Yes, and have them know you in advance.
Exactly.
It's very, to have that open conversation prior to is very beneficial, especially when something happens. So Raffi, thank you again for taking the time to join this group, and much appreciated. Looking forward to potentially having you in the in-person events sometime soon. Things are opening up, and thank you again for joining. Thanks all for joining. Looking forward to seeing you in the next event. Take care all.